Hello everyone, welcome back to Shota Aizawa Podfics. Today we're going to be reading Chapter 16 of Your Presence is a Dream in this Godforsaken Nightmare by Chaotic Bitch 033. I was supposed to be reading Chapter 16 and 17, which is the last few chapters, but I'm tired, and if that doesn't give you enough information on who's reading this fic, then I'll give you an entire slide on it. It's Shota Aizawa, who's supposed to be on patrol, but my, not annoying husband, my amazing, loving, bright husband offered to take patrol because he's so great. Period. Yeah. So, yeah. That's basically it. We're gonna get started now. Chapter 16. Finally home. Summary. Everybody goes home. Smiley face. Finding a doctor to help Izuku wasn't difficult. Actually, Nezu had already paged a doctor. Nobody knows how he got a pager or how he knew that Izuku needed a doctor. When Izuku had agreed to the checkup. Nezu was also the reason why a swarm of nurses hadn't stormed the room after their patient had disconnected himself from his heart monitor. The actual checkup with the doctor, well, all things considered, the checkup went fairly well. After Izuku was carried back to his hospital bed by Hizashi, Aizawa took up residence in one of the nearby visitor chairs with his husband by his side, anxiously awaiting the medical professional. And he didn't have to wait long. Mere minutes after Izuku's meltdown, the doctor, an older woman with short, brassy hair, knocked firmly on the door before entering. Izuku immediately let out the breath he had been holding. The woman's face was wrinkled and kind-looking, and she wasn't anything like Overhaul's doctor. Her name was Dr. Kikuchi, and she was short and stout, but carried with her an authority that Izuku respected a lot. It still didn't do much for his general fear, considering he flinched whenever she would touch him or move unexpectedly. Nor did it quell his panic upon seeing her stark white lab coat moving towards him. But he managed. The pain that arose whenever she poked or prodded his injuries was barely even noticeable, and the examination ended fairly quickly. Straightening from her slouched position, Dr. Kikuchi's gaze swept from Izuku to the two pro-heroes, her gaze dark and her brows furrowed. As of right now, Izuku is in relatively stable condition physically. Our team of doctors included a man with an organ restoration quirk, so the wounds to his abdomen are healing nicely. The severity of his burns was lessened with the help of a tissue aging quirk, but some are still expected to scar. Unfortunately, there are two major issues that we weren't able to fix with any quirks. Izuku stiffened, clutching the thin white sheets of his bed tightly. He didn't look at the doctor, didn't look at Aizawa or Hizashi. Honestly, he didn't think he could. So he just stared at his bandaged hands, eyes fixed on a tiny spot of red amidst the sea of white, as he tried to focus on her words without slipping away into his own mind. The first is on his right foot. We weren't able to salvage enough of it to restore the limb completely. With your permission, we'll amputate what's still remaining of it. We can connect you with some engineers that specialize in prosthetics if you so choose. That was bad news. Like, pretty bad. Izuku bit the inside of his cheek so hard he could taste blood, fighting down the nausea swelling in his chest. He didn't have the money for the amputation, let alone a prosthetic. He was covered by his mother's insurance, but there was no way she was going to approve that. He bet that she wouldn't even pick up the hospital's phone calls. He had been planning to live on his own, survive in a shelter or something, but this? If he couldn't walk, then he couldn't work, and if he couldn't work, then... Dr. Kikuchi cleared her throat gently, and Izuku's head snapped upwards. The room was quiet, all of the occupants staring expectantly at Izuku. He realized with a start that everyone had been waiting on him, waiting for him to respond. Sorry, what else? Izuku managed to croak out, cringing at how pitiful he sounded. He dug his fingernails into his palm, urging himself to stay focused, to pay attention. Right, well, under your unique... The woman paused at this, the words sounding hollow and strange. Circumstances, we have been informed that your quirk was... how should I say this? Transferred to you in a both mentally and physically traumatic exchange. Izuku clenched his teeth at the phrasing. It wasn't his quirk, it was Aizawa's. He didn't ask for this. He never wanted this. Fingers digging into his skull, reaching and pulling as he screamed and thrashed and sobbed. We can transfer the eye back to you, Mr. Aizawa, but doing so is risky, to say the least. Izuku blinked away the memory, his heart pounding against his throat. He stayed silent as Aizawa spoke up, his voice hoarse and his gaze tired. What do you mean, risky? For one, Izuku would be left completely blind in his left eye. Simply put, his optic nerve is already fragile. If we were to perform this procedure, it would become too damaged to transmit visual information to the brain, even with another donor eye or the help of any technology. Aizawa shifted in his seat, hands gripping the armrest of the chair he was in. Hisashi put his hand on Aizawa's shoulder, ignoring the way it shook. Dr. Kikuchi continued. That's on Izuku's end. If we were to transfer the eye back to you, Mr. Aizawa, it is possible that your quirk factor could become strained due to the stress of the operation. However, if you do decide to transfer, the chances of regaining full vision are promising. The room fell into a tense silence. Dr. Kikuchi waited for someone to say something, but no one did. She pursed her lips knowingly, her eyes filled with sadness. That is all. If you have any questions or concerns, I am more than welcome to answer them. This is, of course, your choice. I'll prepare the necessary paperwork and drop it off as soon as I can. Until then, I wish you all the best. She bowed politely before gathering her equipment and leaving the room. Even after the door clipped shut behind her, no one spoke. After a few moments of quiet, Hisashi stood from his chair, gently removing his hand from his husband's shoulder. I think you two have something to talk about. I'll be outside if you need anything. Hisashi's voice was lower than usual, lacking the usual dramatic emphasis that he used often as President Mike. He spared one last worried look at Aizawa and Izuku before excusing himself from the room quietly. Neither of them spoke for a while. Aizawa stared at the floor, unmoving. Izuku tried not to lose himself in the past. It was a tense silence. You should take... I'm not going to... The two spoke at the same time, stopping abruptly upon hearing the other's voice. Surprised, their gazes met. Aizawa nodded encouragingly at Izuku, prompting him to continue. He did so hesitantly, trying to steady his breathing as he picked at the bandages on his hands, fingers catching on the uneven strips of fabric. You should take your eye back. I can't. It's not... His voice cracked, and he tried to continue but found himself unable to. Aizawa's empty gaze softened into something more sad, more tired. He ran a hand through his hair, his face downcast. Kid, it's better than you being blind in one eye. It's the logical thing to do. Your quirk... Izuku turned to Aizawa, the words bubbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. It's not my quirk, he spat. It's yours, and you need to take it back. You're a hero, Zawa. You're a Eraserhead, for fuck's sake. He didn't want to be having this conversation. They shouldn't be having this conversation. I can still use my quirk just fine, Aizawa interjected, his eyes furrowed. Sure, it's going to take more time to get used to, but that's nothing compared to the alternative. Izuku scoffed in disbelief, pulling at his hair to stop himself from screaming. It's your quirk, Zawa. I'm not keeping it. What's so horrible about having my eye that you would rather be blind for? I know that the quirk is weird and different, and I know it's a lot to handle right now, but... You don't know anything, Aizawa. Aizawa clamped his mouth shut, staring at Izuku in a mixture of disbelief and hurt. Izuku stared right back, tears now streaming steadily down his face, his chest heaving. He ignored the twinge of guilt he felt, too caught up in the argument to stop now. If I keep your eye, I'll be reminded every day that I'm the reason why they took your eye. I'm the reason why they tortured you. Why you're covered in scars. Why you were separated from your family. I don't need a reminder for something that I already know. Izuku's voice cracked, but he kept going, choking out a humorous laugh. Hell, the look on Hizashi's face when he realized that I'm the reason why his husband is half blind was more than enough for me. And to top it all off, I have your fucking quirk. Do you know how much I wanted to have a quirk like yours growing up? Any quirk, really. I just wanted a quirk, and now I have one, but every time I use it, all I can think about is Overhaul's hand at your throat, ready to rip you apart because of me. Izuku could barely breathe, vision blurring from his tears, shoulders shaking uncontrollably. He stifled a sob, gritting his teeth angrily. He was tired of crying, tired of feeling like this, like you think that all of this happened because of you, that this was your fault. Aizawa's voice was quiet, broken. The sound of it had Izuku glancing up, startled. The hero was staring at him with a strange look on his face, somehow more defeated than Izuku had ever seen him look before. He looked like Izuku had just ripped out his heart, and Izuku wished that he had just kept his mouth shut because he hurt Aizawa again, as if it were the only thing he could do properly. He didn't respond, couldn't force a lump out of his throat to form the words, because of course it was his fault. It was always his fault, and he wished so desperately that it wasn't. But he didn't know how to break the cycle, didn't know how to stop hurting everything and everyone around him. Izuku was just one of those people that no one was happy to see. He knew that. When he would join conversations, they would stop or get ugly. When he would try to make things better, he only made them worse. So he isolated. He left people to be happy in his absence, happy because of his absence. But then he was kidnapped, and Aizawa came along, and he knew he shouldn't have gotten attached, but he got attached anyways. And Overhaul used that to his advantage, and now Aizawa was half blind because of it. Aizawa stood up from the uncomfortable visitor's chair, making his way over to Izuku's hospital bed. He stopped when he reached the bed's railing, close enough that Izuku could see the tremor in his hand, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Kid, look at me, please." His voice was low and gentle, almost begging. Izuku scrunched up his face, eyes still fixed on his bandages. He couldn't. He had raised his voice, and now Aizawa was probably mad at him, or ready to leave now that he had realized that Izuku was the reason why he had gotten so hurt. Aizawa put his hands on top of Izuku's. "Izuku," he pleaded, his voice breaking painfully. Izuku braced himself internally before darting his gaze upwards to meet Aizawa's. He expected to find anger, annoyance, maybe even hatred. Instead, he was faced with deep, pure sorrow. The sight had him crying even harder. Aizawa was quick to wrap his arms around Izuku's shoulders, pulling him close as he cried. Izuku sunk into the familiar embrace on instinct, burying his head into the man's neck with a sob. Aizawa just held him, one arm wrapped around Izuku while the other stroked his hair comfortingly. A moment passed before he pulled back, face to face with Izuku. "Kid, none of that was your fault. None of it. You and I were both hurt because of Overhaul, because of the doctor. You had nothing to do with it. Nothing." Part of Izuku wanted to believe Aizawa, but he couldn't. He just couldn't. He stared at the man, trying to get him to understand, trying to convey his guilt, his sorrow. "Zawa, the only reason why you were even kidnapped was because of me. Because I was there. I was collateral for you. And I didn't mean to make it so hard for you. Izuku trailed off, covering his head in his hands. "If I had managed to die before you got kidnapped, none of this would have happened," he muttered to himself under his breath, the words coming out before he could really even think about them. Aizawa inhaled sharply, the sound of it loud in the quiet room. Izuku's stomach sunk. He didn't think that Aizawa would be able to hear that. He shouldn't have said that in the first place. It was stupid. So stupid. What do you mean, managed to die? Izuku let his hands fall to his lap, trying to think of something to say, some way to explain the mess that he had got himself into. Nothing came to mind. Izuku, what do you mean by that? Aizawa asked again, his gaze worried and scared, and Izuku wished he had an answer, but he felt like he was suffocating and falling at the same time, and all he wanted was for Aizawa to forget everything he had just said. But deep down, a voice inside Izuku screamed to tell anyone, to just be honest for once. So he took a breath and started talking. I was alone for a while before you came. Everything was too dark, too quiet. I was tired of being alone. His eyes stung, and his hands were starting to hurt because of how hard he was clenching them. They were doing bad things because of me, and I didn't want that to happen anymore, so I stopped eating, and it almost worked. I was so close, but the doctor noticed, and he made me eat, and he threatened to kill my mom if I didn't, so I did. But if I had just kept going for a little bit longer... Izuku's frustration rant was cut off once again by Aizawa pulling him back into a strong embrace. The boy was surprised this time to feel tiny wet droplets falling onto his hospital gowns, the tears not coming from him. He hadn't noticed that Aizawa was trembling, or how quickly the man was breathing, until now. I'm so glad you're here, kid. Never, ever forget that. You mean so much to me, Izuku. I want to help you with this. Please, just let me help you with this. The words were muffled by the hug, but it didn't bother Izuku. Because for the first time in his life, it didn't matter that Izuku was quirkless. It didn't matter if he was strong or weak. It didn't matter if he was slow or fast, smart or not. He didn't need to prove his worth to Aizawa. Didn't need to clean the house or pay the bills to receive such kindness. Izuku just was... He existed. Even when he was loud and angry and rude, Aizawa was nice to him. He still loved him. He was happy that Izuku was alive and around him, and he wanted to keep it that way. The thought was too much for Izuku to comprehend, but he had time. If you really don't want your eye back, then I'll keep it. The words were spoken before he really had a chance to think things through, but it felt right, somehow. Buried in Aizawa's arms, stuck in a hospital bed, Izuku had never felt so loved. He was still conflicted about the eye, not to mention the baggage he had to work through regarding having a cork now, but maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be a sign of his own weakness anymore. He hoped that one day it could be a reminder of this moment, of warmth and compassion and kind words that no one had ever bothered to tell him before. Maybe one day. Once all of the paperwork was officially filled out, Izuku's right foot, what remained of it, was amputated. The surgery took several hours, but was successful. He didn't ask about the cost. Honestly, he didn't want to know. He figured he'd be in debt for the next few years. It was worth it, as long as it meant he could walk. At least that's what he told himself. He still had 6 more days left in the hospital for extra monitoring, which meant a lot of sleeping, gazing longingly outside the window, and spending time with Aizawa and Hizashi. Aizawa was still in the hospital for another 2 days, so the heroes were around Izuku quite a bit. Izuku didn't want to think about what it would be like when they left, so he chose not to. His mom still hadn't shown up, which wasn't surprising to Izuku. He didn't ask if the doctors had tried to contact her, if her number was even the same, if her insurance went through. It wasn't something he wanted to draw any attention to, especially not in front of Aizawa or Hizashi. While Aizawa spent some time in physical therapy or in individual meetings with the doctor, Hizashi would often wait with Izuku in the boys' hospital room, talking about talking with him about heroes or fun birds or really anything that popped into his head. Izuku had grown to appreciate Hisashi's company immensely. While he adored Aizawa, the man was more quiet, reassuring. Hisashi, on the other hand, was like energy personified. Any semblance of a thought that Izuku had was immediately picked up and ran away with, bright and loud and friendly. After getting over his fear of new people, coupled with his anxiety about talking to one of his favorite heroes in the flesh, Izuku loved spending time with Hisashi. It was surprising, really, how quick Izuku was to warm up to Hisashi. His closeness to Aizawa helped Izuku trust him more easily. But Izuku thinks Hisashi is just that nice of a person. Aizawa had talked about Hisashi like he was a walking ball of sunshine, but Izuku hadn't actually seen it in action until recently, the day after Izuku's surgery. When Izuku was confined to his bed and bored out of his mind, Hisashi had entered his hospital room carrying a cloth bag, a kind smile on his face. "Hey, little listener, how you feeling?" "Oh, I'm good, Mr. President Mike. How are you?" Hisashi laughed fondly, plopping down into a nearby chair. "I'm doing just fine, kid. You know, you don't have to call me by my hero name when I'm not working. You can call me Yamada, or Hisashi if you want. Sho calls me Hisashi. You can call me that, too." Izuku's cheeks felt warm as he nodded, feeling a little awkward. He was never good with new people, especially after being in captivity for so long. It was like all his social skills just flew out the window the second he tried to open his mouth. But Hisashi never pressed him, never made him feel bad about it. It was nice. It was really nice. "Oh, almost forgot." Hisashi reached into the bag on his shoulder, pulling out a few things and handing them over to Izuku. "I figured you'd be pretty bored by just sitting here all day, so I brought you some stuff to keep you occupied. I didn't really know what you liked, but Sho said as long as you can write, you'd be good. So I got some notebooks and pencils that seemed a little boring, so I also got a coloring book and markers." As Hisashi rambled on, his eyes bright and his hands waving with every word, Izuku looked at the small pile of things on his hospital bed. The sight had Izuku blinking back tears. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had bought him something picked out especially for him, with his interests in mind, simply to make sure that he wasn't bored. 2 notebooks, a pack of mechanical pencils, colored pencils, a hero-themed coloring book, a case of markers, and... His gaze stopped at a little package of crayons, colorful and unassuming. Overhaul held the crayon in between his fingers, and Izuku watched as the paper covering bubbled, merging with the wax beneath it. As the whole thing warped, unholy and unnatural. Izuku took a deep breath, looking back at Hisashi. The man stopped talking, his excitement replaced with worry, eyes wide with panic. Oh my gosh, are you okay? I didn't mean to upset you. I told Nomori to get a few coloring books just in case you didn't like that one, but she said that one would be fine, so I went with it, but I can totally get you a different one. No, Izuku's voice cracked. He realized he was crying, but made no move to wipe the tears streaming down his cheeks. "It's perfect. It's more than perfect. Thank you, Hisashi. Thank you." He tried his best to convey his gratitude, how much this meant to him, meant for him, but he didn't know how, didn't know where to start. "Thank you," he said again, tears still falling down his face as his hand shook, holding the package of crayons that Hisashi had picked out for him, had bought for him, had given him. Hisashi's worry melted away as he gave Izuku a small smile. It was sad, and it was knowing. "Of course, Izuku, of course." The two sat together comfortably, just enjoying the other's presence. Hisashi would make funny faces at Izuku every now and then to try and tear him up, which Izuku would obviously reciprocate. By the time that Aizawa returned from physical therapy, the pair were laughing together about silly dad jokes. Izuku didn't want it to end. He really, really didn't want it to end. The day passes faster than Izuku had wanted them to. And soon enough, it was Izuku's last day in the hospital. As ironic as it may seem, it was the best week of Izuku's life. He spent so much time with Aizawa and Hisashi. They had decided to stay in the hospital with Izuku until he got discharged, only ever leaving occasionally to get new clothes or toiletries. Izuku didn't know why they wanted to stay with him, but he wasn't complaining, and was too scared to ask, lest he scared them off. But they played games together, and drew weird pictures and laughed about nothing and everything. They even practiced sign language together since Hisashi was deaf, although he communicated verbally as well. Izuku had asked about it after the three had finished a game of Go Fish. Present Mike, Mr. Hisashi, sir? We'll work on that, the man said with a smile. What's up? Oh, right. Sorry, Hisashi. I was wondering, you said something about your hearing being permanently damaged because of your quirk, but you and I are talking right now, not signing, so you can still hear. Yep, growing up. My quirk did a real number on my inner ear. I'm deaf, but was able to get a cochlear implanted. At this, the man turned his head, dragging a section of his hair back to reveal a circular device embedded in his head, with a cord connecting to what looked like a singular hearing aid on the shell of his ear. Before I lost my hearing completely, without it, I couldn't hear a thing. Even with it, some noises are hard to make out. It's not perfect, but I make it work. I still sign a lot with Sho, and I try to stay involved in the community. Does that make sense? Yeah, thank you, Hisashi, sir. Hisashi spared an exasperated look to his husband. Shoto, where did you find this kid? I think it's the other way around. The kid found me. The corner of Aizawa's mouth curled upwards, his tone playful. Izuku smiled, cleaning up the playing cards and putting them back in the case. Hisashi stood up with a sigh, kissing Aizawa on the forehead as he made his way over to the door. Okay, I'm going to go check on the discharge paperwork. Should be about ready. And then you'll be all set, kiddo. He left the room with a smile, quiet falling in his absence. Panic struck Izuku like a truck, a crushing weight against his chest. He had prepared for this. He knew that this was coming, knew that he would be on his own, but it didn't make any of it easier because he loved them. He really did, and if they forced him to go back to his mom's house, she would just kick him out the second they turned their backs, and he would never see them again. And Aizawa tapped his forehead lightly, eyebrows furrowed. Izuku's head snapped up, blinking a few times, as he tried to school his expression, cursing himself for getting lost in his own fear. Sorry, I, zoned out. What's going on? Right. Aizawa surveyed the Izuku closely before continuing. I just asked if you were excited to finally leave this place, kid. It was a valid question, normal, given the circumstances, but it didn't help to quell the bile creeping up Izuku's throat, the almost painful static inching its way from Izuku's fingers to his hands to his wrists. After his mom would kick him out, he had to find work, food, shelter. But he still didn't have a right foot. Maybe he could build his own prosthetic. He remembered an abandoned beach filled with trash. Maybe he could find some materials there and make somewhere to sleep out of an old car or something. He hadn't even considered what school would look like, but he assumed that he'd continue his education at a public library if possible. Kid, what's the problem? Talk to me. Aizawa's tone was soft, barely able to be heard even from his position at Izuku's bedside in one of those awful visitor's chairs. Izuku looked up quickly, not realizing how long he'd been lost in his thought for. Rushing to cover up his pained silence, he tried to reassure the man. Sorry. Nothing's wrong. I'm excited, definitely. Izuku cringed internally at how suspicious that sounded. Based on the look Aizawa was giving him, he didn't buy it either. You want to tell me what's actually wrong, or am I going to find out when someone blows up in a few hours? Izuku flushed at having been caught in his lie. It was embarrassing. He blamed the pain meds for messing up with his ability to lie, but it was probably just because he was a bad liar. He tried to pick out something he could tell Aizawa that wouldn't have the hero worrying or result in him being sent to an orphanage. Something true, but not the whole truth. I guess I'm upset that I won't get to see you, he started slowly, gaze fixated on a loose thread from the thin hospital blanket. He didn't think he could look at Aizawa without crying. I know that I shouldn't be, and I'm happy that you get to live with Hizashi and your cats, and I'm sure that I can build myself a phone to text you with sometimes. While Izuku rambled, Aizawa sat in silence, realizing that out of all of the people he had already told, all of the preparations he had made to clean out their spare bedroom and get the paperwork filled out, there was still one thing he had forgotten to do. One tiny little detail. And I know you work at UA, so I can only stop by for a visit, or not if you don't want that, which is totally fine. Shit. Izuku's head whipped up, eyebrows furrowed in confusion at Aizawa's sudden outburst. Is everything okay, Zawa? Aizawa just stared at his kid for a minute, trying to find the right words. Something like, "Hey, so I kind of maybe adopted you and arrested your mom. Sorry, I forgot to tell you." Didn't feel like the right thing to say at the moment. Zawa? Kid, how do you feel about... Aizawa paused, taking a deep breath. About coming home with Zashi and I. Izuku sat, motionless. His face was blank. The words didn't make sense to him. What? What I meant was that both Hizashi and I want to adopt you as our kid. Izuku's confused expression turned into one of shock. His mouth dropped open. You don't have to agree. I just thought it would. I mean, from what you told me about your mom and how she abused you and shit, I just assumed you would be coming home with me after all we've been through together, and I should have asked earlier. I wasn't thinking. Aizawa's uncharacteristic ramble was cut short when Izuku started crying, choking out a sob. The hero froze, trying to figure out what to say. Fuck, kid, I'm sorry. You don't have to say anything. I didn't mean to upset you. Shit. You went to adopt me? Izuku's broken voice seemed to echo throughout the tiny hospital room. He didn't know what to think, what to say. Aizawa's eye widened in realization. Izuku, I planned on adopting you practically 7 months ago. I'm sorry it took so long to ask. This wasn't what Izuku had planned for. It didn't make sense in his brain. Didn't compute that they wanted to be around him, wanted to stay around him. I don't understand. Izuku's voice kept cutting out, his throat too tight to form the words but desperate to ask, to know, to understand. Aizawa just pulled Izuku into his arms, wrapping the boy in a tight embrace. I want to help you understand, if you'll let me. Does that sound okay? For a moment, a single moment, Izuku was able to breathe. That was all he ever wanted, was for someone to help him understand why he ruined things, why people didn't like him, why everyone always got hurt because of him, or hurt him because he deserved it, and Aizawa wanted to help him understand why they wanted to adopt him. Izuku nodded against Aizawa's shoulder. He couldn't say anything, couldn't force the words out of his mouth, but Aizawa knew. He knew. They would work through it together, as a family. The trip to Hisashi and Aizawa's apartment was quick and comfortable. After being discharged from the hospital with several packets of aftercare instructions and information on mechanics and prosthetic workers in the area, as well as a hearty supply of pain medication, Izuku, Hisashi, and Aizawa made their way to the car parked in the hospital parking garage. Izuku was still getting used to the whole family thing, and was surprised when Hisashi had offered to push his wheelchair so he didn't overexert himself. Upon reaching the car and struggling fruitlessly to pull himself into the back seat, Izuku was extremely embarrassed when Hisashi had picked him up, hiding his face in his hands as the hero laughed. Aizawa had just watched with a grin on his face, looking like a pirate now that he had temporarily covered his missing eye with an eye patch. But Izuku's lingering feelings of embarrassment couldn't stop Izuku's wonder as he saw the outside world for the first time in far, far too long. Aizawa and Izuku both gawked openly at the people, the buildings, the sun, the grass. The car ride was relatively quiet as they took in their surroundings, familiar but distant, like seeing a friend from childhood after being apart for years. Aizawa and Hisashi's actual apartment complex was tucked nicely between what looked like an office building and a small, family-owned grocery store. The building itself was plain and unassuming, but the inside was sleek and modern, armed with high-tech security systems and a secretary in the lobby at all times. It was definitely fancier than Izuku was used to, and he felt entirely out of place wearing his matching neon yellow Present Mike sweatshirt and sweatpants. It was what Hisashi had on hand, and Izuku had insisted that he shouldn't spend money on him. But Hisashi and Aizawa were both in sweats, with their hair messy and tangled, and the secretary didn't look at them weird, so Izuku stuffed down his anxiety and just focused on analyzing the new environment, which was really incredibly cool. One elevator ride later, the three all stood, or sat in Izuku's case, in front of the apartment door. Izuku tried to ignore the way his stomach flopped, hands trembling against the armrest of his wheelchair. Aizawa rested a hand on his shoulder, warm and comforting, as Hisashi unlocked the door, revealing a cozy, yet bigger than expected, living room. Slowly, Aizawa wheeled Izuku into the threshold. His pulse was racing, heart pounding against his chest. Meow. A fluffy creature ran up to them, followed closely by two others. The three cats were practically screaming, stepping all over each other in an attempt to get closer to the humans. Izuku's panic was swiftly interrupted as his eyes went wide because they were so fucking cute. Hisashi and Aizawa both chuckled as Hisashi picked up one of the cats, showing him to a surprised Izuku. The cat's fur was black and brown, and he had a chunk missing from one ear, and a good bit of pudge hanging from his stomach. This is Cadaver. Cadaver, meet Izuku. He's going to be living with us now. Hisashi moved the cat's arm in a waving motion, eliciting a grin from Izuku and a meow from Cadaver, who quickly jumped out of Hisashi's arms to sniff Izuku's wheelchair. Aizawa pointed to the next cat, a fluffy white one with bright blue eyes and chubby paws. That one sprinkles. Don't let her charm deceive you. She can be a real pain in the ass when she wants to be. Izuku snorted, covering his mouth with his hand, his eyes sparkling. Aizawa ruffled his hair in response, a fond look on his face. And this... Hisashi picked up the last cat, and by far the largest of the three with a wide smile, plopping him down in Izuku's lap. Is Bastard. The cat immediately made itself comfortable in Izuku's lap, curling up closely against his torso. Izuku hesitantly began petting Bastard's head, looking up in surprise and delight at Hisashi and Aizawa when a loud purring could be heard. Hisashi made sure to take plenty of photos, to commemorate the occasion, of course. Moving further into the house, Hisashi and Aizawa showed Izuku the living room, an open area filled with two comfortable-looking couches, a simple coffee table, a flat-screen TV, and shelves lining the walls, full of various knickknacks, and other random collectibles. Right off of the living room was the kitchen, a small but neat area armed with plenty of counter space and a little breakfast nook overlooking the city below. The tour continued down to a hallway off of the kitchen, leading to the master bedroom, bathroom, and an office. All the while, Azuku took everything in like a sponge. Little glimpses at photos and merchandise and cat toys made his heart swell with an unfamiliar feeling. The whole house felt so cozy and warm. It was a sharp contrast to the cold and uninviting space that he used to share with his mother. Izuku shook his head to rid himself of the unpleasant thought. They had reached a new room, a small bedroom with a wide, bright window. The room had a wood-framed twin bed and a matching dresser, as well as a desk and chair pushed up against the far wall. Various hero posters lined the walls, ranging from Midnight to Death Arms, and even including a vintage Present Mike poster. So cool. Noticing that Hisashi had fallen quiet, Izuku turned his head to gaze at the man inquisitively. Hisashi was looking at Izuku with kind eyes, a small, shy smile on his face. This is your room. I hope you like it. I didn't really have a lot of time to put everything together. Nem helped a lot, and I know you like hero stuff, and I had plenty of posters just sitting around. As Hisashi rambled, Izuku turned his eyes back to the room in front of him. His room. He turned to look at Aizawa, the man greeting him with a sly grin and shining gaze. Izuku thought back to the cold, dark cell he had spent over a year of his life trapped in. He remembered all of the lonely nights where, no matter how hard he cried or screamed or begged, no one came to save him. All of the pain and hurt and fear he had felt, the doctor's sick grin, Overhaul's terrifying presence. He thought of his life before getting kidnapped, of his mom and Bakugo, of all of the burns and scathing words, the fridge that was always empty, the house that only ever seemed cold. Now, looking at the room in front of him, Izuku didn't feel cold. He wasn't alone. Izuku barely felt the tears rolling down his cheeks, could barely feel Aizawa's hand on his shoulder or a bastard snuggling into his lap. All Izuku could feel was warm. He felt loved in a way that he never believed was possible before. He's perfect. Alright, everyone, that is the end of Chapter 16 of Your Presence is a Dream in This Godforsaken Nightmare. I know I said I was tired, but that doesn't mean Izuku isn't awake right now, and he's writing in his notebooks in the other room. So he'll read Chapter 17 tonight, which is the final chapter. So keep a lookout for that one, and everyone have a great night. Period.
Shutting it down, necessitated a book. No, I don't do that flashy shit. I'm lurking in the shadows. I get dirty with the vermin, bitch. I'm working in the gravel. Schooling in the day, I'm teaching in the night. What you teaching? I am teaching all these leeches how to fight. Teaching how to catch these hands flying every direction. Don't get loud, we can battle. Always keep the mic present. Eyes on red, cause my eyes on wide. Gotta keep them prize. Somebody dollar bin style. Yeah, time is of the essence when I blink, then die. I can't stomach that defeat. I got weak enzymes. When I break you down, Gio won't be at your bedside. Wrapped around your neck, Epstein, Epstein. Drew a line in the sand. Teachers call that deadlines. I don't care about the light. I just wanna get mine. Midoriya came through with door and I was flabbergasted. Who's this bastard that is getting laughed at? Less the class harass him. Bakugo, he is combative, but his limits he surpassed him. You are not the fastest. So far, every showing's been disastrous. Had to shut you down. Danger to yourself and to the masses. Truly wondered if you had a beating heart in your thoracic. Almost spit you out, no capping, but you showed you more than spastic. Putting power in your finger tickle, that is quite the tactic. Square up when you see my hair out. This is dark, all this power you been yapping about. I don't give a fuck. Night is blink before this battle, so my lids are risen, bruh. The thought of going hand to hand is got your Jimmy sitting up. But my life is more than mine. I train them for the catastrophic. See the hope inside the darkness. We got dilated optics. We do it for the violated, not